Let me introduce myself. My name is Natalia. I head up a mAgri program at GSMA, have been on this program for 5 years, have seen industry evolving tremendously over the last 5 years, and yeah, we'll talk about some trends at this session. What we do is mobile agriculture program at GSMA. We aspire to catalyze the industry. We do this by providing risk capital to mobile operators and their partners, and we also share best practices, and we publish lots of tools and resources for the industry to allow the uptake of scalable commercial services in the sector. So today we have put a panel for you, and my colleague Victoria will shortly come on stage and introduce the panel speakers. And please participate, ask questions, because it's an interactive session and you might get the most out of it if you manage to get your questions in. So I'll kick off. It's been a very intense week at Mobile World Congress. The theme this year is all around innovation and what's going to happen with the industry and how mobile operators are going to innovate in the next 5 years. So what's very interesting is that in developed countries, the mobile industry is really hit the glass ceiling. In the developing countries, we're still hoping to see some growth. But already in the urban areas, the penetration is rising very high, and the only large untapped market at the moment for mobile operators is the rural segment. And GSMA has estimated that the next 1.8 billion connections will actually come from rural areas. What it means for mobile operators, they have to start innovating in a different way. They have to make sure that they're not only growing their business in terms of a number of connections and the revenues, but also maintain the profit margins, and it's still reasonable business for them to be in. And they have to start understanding the rural subscribers, and unfortunately until now we haven't really seen mobile operators being very actively engaged in understanding the segment. Agriculture is really a very important first step towards understanding what rural sector is requiring in terms of services and products. And globally, there are more than 2.3 billion people that depend on agriculture for their livelihood and income, which is a significant business opportunity for mobile operators. The way we see this is that agriculture represents a massive sector where mobile operators can introduce content services, M2M services, mobile financial services, and actually expand their business in a significant, innovative way in the next 5 years. So for the last 5 years, we've been focusing a lot on the content-based services, and today I would like you to look into your beautiful canvas bags, and you will find one of the reports which is called Emerging Business Models in Mobile Agriculture, that looks into the business models for delivering content services and where this industry is going. We've also done some forecasting about the number of potential users, addressable market for those services, and I'm going to show them to you right now. So we have looked at two most important areas for smallholder farmers, which is South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, and the estimated addressable market across those two regions for the content-based agricultural services is reaching 84 million users by 2020. This has been estimated based on the increase in penetration in rural areas, as well as the number of people which are likely to stay in rural areas and still be engaged in agriculture, as well as the likelihood of uptake of value-added services in general across the segment. What's very interesting is how the design of the services is going to be looking like by 2020. And unfortunately, although the technology is becoming more accessible, the literacy levels most likely going to remain the same, which means that some of the most important design challenges are still going to remain there. So how do we design services, content-rich services for population which is not only poor, but also highly illiterate and also technology illiterate? So you can see that by 2020, voice will still be the most demanded channel for the information-based services. But another very interesting trend that I want to zoom in is the uptake of smartphones. And we see the increasing affordability of smartphones overall and in rural areas in particular, which means that we will have to rethink the business models for delivering content services by 2020. What it actually means is that you go into rural areas. This picture was taken a month ago in Myanmar, and you've been filmed by rural people on smartphones, and they become incredibly comfortable using this technology, and also younger users start teaching other people in the family on how to use the phones. What it would mean for mobile operators, I think it would depend on what they decide to do with this opportunity. Some still look at the agricultural services as the way to increase basic connectivity and offer voice services, increase market share in rural areas. But some, like Orido Myanmar, are looking at this as an opportunity to drive digital inclusion, how provision of agricultural content on smartphones can increase the value of database services. And very interestingly, this week, some conversations with internet players revealed that Facebook is not enough for rural users. They are also starting to go into agricultural content business right now. So until now, and also this is something that we have looked into more detail in the report, we've seen some of the business models already emerging, and mobile operators can really reap some indirect benefits, such as decrease in churn. And we have seen some very good cases in Madagascar and India of churn reduction for mobile operators by providing high impact social value-added services, up to 10% annual churn reduction rate. It's also a channel for acquiring rural subscribers, and Airtel India has demonstrated that by offering green SIM card, they can increase the number of connections in rural areas, and 5% of all the rural subscribers actually come through this channel. There is also opportunity for direct revenues, and we have done some projections around these numbers, and the annual direct revenues from consumers for content-based services would reach almost $500 million across those two markets, South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. There is also a very interesting opportunity to look more into value chains, and we're going to have a speaker on stage as well talking about how solutions might be tailored for agricultural businesses that work with smallholder farmers and might be interested in increasing the efficiency of their transactions and communications with smallholders, and how they can actually provide revenues for the service providers. And yeah, this emerging new trend, how this content is going to drive data traffic and what it's going to mean for the business models. And we have seen how mobile operators looking into using airtime to pay for the applications through their dedicated app stores, like their own mobile operator-driven app stores. There are lots of innovative models, and it would be very exciting to see what exactly is going to happen by 2020. I think what I was trying to say is that there are business models, there is demand. We have seen from our services that people do go to mobile agriculture solutions, even if they're very badly designed and they're trying to get the services that are relevant to them. So demand is there, business opportunity is there. Why services are not yet reaching scale, or why they're not being adopted to the level where we can talk about mass impact, is because of the service design. And I'm coming back to the same point. Mobile operators and service providers do not understand rural users. And this time we working with Frog team who help us to work with mobile operators and understand the rural segment much better. And really agriculture is just the first take on rural sector, but we think it's mobile operators to be able to innovate in the future, have to invest much more in user research and also form partnerships with the local service providers to be able to create value for the agricultural sector. There is not only opportunity for the content-based services, also agriculture presents a massive opportunity for driving financial services uptake in rural areas, and mobile operators, third-party providers looking at how we can digitize existing transactions that are happening within ag space, as well as how we can drive financial inclusion in this sector and provide services for farmers, such as insurance credit and savings. And we have a speaker from CGAP who is going to touch on the opportunity in this area. There is also another opportunity that agriculture presents, and this is driving M2M connections for mobile operators. One more report that you're going to find in your Canvas box is about M2M connections, and just want to highlight the opportunity there. So the estimated revenue opportunity for mobile operators is going to reach $500 million annually. However, what we see at the moment is that mobile operators do not really understand the business case in agricultural sectors yet. So we have looked at a variety of products and compared how many of them are being mobile operator-led, or mobile operator even understands that these connections are happening and partnering with local service providers to deliver M2M solutions. And you can see that the one industry that has been the most well understood is the fleet management. Actually has majority of products being driven by mobile operators, 80% of them, while in agriculture it's only a tiny fraction, 17% of all the services for M2M in agriculture been driven by mobile operators. What actually means that they sometimes do not know that there are small entrepreneurs using the M2M connections to increase efficiency within agriculture, such as water management or pesticide use, precision agriculture solutions. All of these things already exist, but mobile operators have not been able to really capture value in this space. So please look into the report and you might have ideas on how this industry is going to evolve. So I'm going to pause here and say that the biggest questions we have right now is how mobile operators are going to drive innovation in the space. Would they be able to do it? Who they should partner with to deliver value for agricultural sector? And what's the role of investors and donors in facilitating the ecosystem and growing this market? So I hope that our panel will touch on some of the trends and some of the challenges in mobile agriculture. And now I would like to invite my colleague Victoria on stage, who is going to bring in the panel speakers for you.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Victoria. I think I recognize a few friendly faces in the crowd. And thanks again for getting up early and being here today on the last day of Mobile World Congress. So I've been with the GSMA mAgri program for around 4 years now. I'm based in our regional office in Nairobi in Kenya. And in my role at the moment, I'm currently working with operators with Airtel Malawi and with Dialogue in Sri Lanka, and supporting other operators and their partners to develop mobile agriculture services and take them to scale. So it's my great pleasure today to be moderating our panel discussion. We've got some fantastic panelists here to talk to you today. And I'll just provide a little background on the theme of the panel. We'll be touching on some of the points that Natalia's already raised this morning. So we'll try to address three themes. The first is really that question of understanding this target customer, understanding what the use cases are for this rural sector, which we've heard is presents a huge opportunity. So that will be our first theme, and then we'll turn to looking at more around the financial services, specifically in the rural sector. And then thirdly, we'll look at the future of the mAgri industry, and specifically look at the opportunity for enterprise or B2B solutions. So with that, and I must add that we'll have time for Q&A at the end, so please do get your questions ready. I'd like to now invite each of our speakers to present a very quick introduction, 5 minutes, to give you some context about their involvement in the mobile agriculture space and why they're working in this space. So first of all, it gives me pleasure to invite Heiko Schliedke, who's the Managing Director of Airtel Malawi, to please come up to the stage and provide a bit of background on what Airtel's doing in this space and why. Thanks, Heiko.
Thank you, Victoria, and good morning, everybody, and also thank you for coming so early. Yeah, why does a mobile operator work in that space, and why are we interested in mobile agriculture? Let me give you a little bit of background. I mean, you know, Victoria has introduced me. I'm the managing director of Airtel in Malawi. But before I came to Malawi, it was about 9 months ago, I was based in Madagascar in the same function, heading our operation there on the beautiful island. And about 5 years ago, a gentleman walked into our office and had an idea. He presented a VAS application based on an IVR system where people could call in and could request health information. And the immediate reaction, obviously, is it's wonderful, that's great. I introduce you to my CSR manager, and from there we can then take and can work and can talk it through. However, it looked interestingly enough that we said, like, there might be a little bit more in it than just that. So we kept an eye on it, and very quickly it became apparent that there is something in there that seems to trigger interest and demand in the rural population. And when we looked a little bit closer, we saw the numbers took up extremely fast. 400, 500, 600,000 people on a regular basis calling in, requesting information, and as I said, this time around, it was still health-based. So we did what I think the smart thing and said, look, CSR is all nice and well, but maybe there's more in it for us. So we pulled it out of the CSR department and put it into the marketing department. And because what we saw, and the numbers now 4 or 5 years later proven it, what we saw is, and Natalie and mentioned it before, that more and more we realize that the people who take this product up, who take this service up, not only use that service, they also suddenly become acquainted with the usage of SMS services. They become acquainted, they have less fear, stage fright, if you will, to take the phone and use it for other purposes. And suddenly there were SMSs going out to Auntie John, and Auntie Jane, and to Uncle Tom, and to God knows who, and we saw that SMS traffic was rising exactly from this target group. So it was, in brief, starting to make business sense. And that is something that is a discovery that I think is only slowly dawning, and that's why we're here. Why does it make sense? And that is one of the reasons. I have recommended this service to my colleague who was still sitting in Malawi, and said, look here, this is a really good idea. Please take it on, which he did. Coincidence wanted it that a few months later I found myself in the chair and taking this project now up in Malawi. And in Malawi we said, do we do health or do we do something else? In Malawi we decided let's try farming as well. And why farming? In Malawi's rural population, there's anywhere estimated, and the estimates vary depending whose sources you tap, but by and large it's said about 4 million farmers in the formal, in the informal, in the subsistence farming, but roughly about 4 million people. Over a population of about 17 million. So a huge amount of people are involved in farming, in agriculture, in one way or the other. And so they represent a massive, massive segment for us. But and it was already said, we haven't got a clue what they are doing. We haven't got a clue how they want to interact with the mobile industry. And the question was asked, after 15 years of mobile telecommunication, Malawi has still a relatively low penetration rate of roughly about 20%. And if there is 4 million, but it is also at the same time a very small country, so coverage is not an issue. We have 85% of the country is covered, so you can estimate very easily that out of those 4 million people, whether they're subsistence farmers or whether they're formal farmers, that they must be under coverage. So why are they not participating in mobile communication? Why is there no interest in taking up a mobile service? And my gut answer was relevance. It doesn't make a difference to them. Mobile communication is something that the relatives do in Lilongwe, in Blantyre, because they can afford it. It makes sense for them. But for us, it doesn't add any value here. So we said, okay, and these are just hunches. These are commercial hunches that you follow when you say, look, there is something that may help us to understand it. So we launched what we call the 3-2-1 service in the similar way like we did in Madagascar. The basis is very simple. The farmer, anybody, this is the good thing. We don't know if it's a farmer. Anybody can use it, and you can call in through the IVR. And there's two IVR trees, roughly about 500 answers. And they give you either health information or they give you farming information. The first 8 calls per month are free. So, and from the 9th call onward, you're charged a nominal fee of roughly about the equivalent of 3 cents. So that's it. It's not, so there's no clock ticking. You're just charged 3 cents for the call. Same applies for the SMS. Within the first 3 months, we saw in similar results, like actually even better results than in Madagascar, about already 400,000 people picking that service up and calling in, asking for information about basic agricultural information and support. Now, how do we take this? How do we take this further? Well, why would we take this further? If there's 4 million people out there that are under coverage and we have only 20% penetration, I'm just speaking mobile operator speak. That's for me interesting enough to say, here's my growth for the next year, for the next 2 years, actually probably for the next 3 years. If only I understand how to reach those people and make the usage of mobile communication in any shape and form relevant for them. From this basis on, we've went together with the GSMA, with the mAgri program, and we are now about to set up the complete mAgri program on the basis of the already quite successful 3-2-1 information service. And we'll build this into a complete ecosystem. I'm not dwelling too much on this. You will hear a little bit more of this from my fellow speakers. But to provide an ecosystem, a closed circle where the farmer finds, if it is a farmer, it might be not a farmer, it might be a friend of a farmer, but unless we have the data, we really don't know. And information, means of payment through mobile money services, so also a financial inclusion element, because also that is what is missing especially in the rural areas. When you talk to the banks in Lilongwe and to the banks in Blantyre, if they will ever build up a affiliate out there in the sticks, they smile at you and certainly say no. But they're of course highly interested to acquire a customer that would bank with them in any shape and form through the means of a mobile application. So going forward, we expect a lot of things developing from this. For us as an operator, it is highly, highly interesting to break into this kind of gray area and understand what's actually happening in the rural areas, what the farmers need, what this community wants from mobile communication. And then, as we learn it along, segment it probably even deeper, and then provide exactly the services and the information that they need. I've been asked, there was this 2020, how does this look in 2020? If you would have asked somebody 5 years ago, how does the mobile communication look in 2015? I guess how many people would have had the right answer. I think nobody. Would you have seen the Galaxy S6 or the iPhone 6 Plus? I don't think so. So I'm very careful with these predictions. All I can say as an operator, I'm extremely optimistic that we will, with these kind of vast applications and targeted services, find ways to build up new customers and build up financial inclusion in those areas. I make now a daring projection that I will have probably 2 million new customers coming exclusively from this area, from the rural community. And I think with my 2 million, I'm not actually exaggerating. I think this is the potential that we have. This will be 2 million new customers in the course of probably not even 5 years, that will bring additional revenue, obviously. They will increase ARPU. But by the sheer nature of the effect of mobile communication and obviously data and integration into the rural areas, they will increase GDP, they will increase the economy of the country, and therefore work for the benefit. It will work for the benefit for us, but also for our stakeholders, government, and investors. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Heiko. Thanks very much, Heiko, and I really look forward to picking up on your point about creating relevance, because I think that's what we're talking about when we're saying understanding that customer and tapping into this opportunity. I'd now like to ask Michael Tarazi to join us up on stage. Michael's a senior financial sector specialist from CGAP, and he'll provide some background on what CGAP's involvement has been in the agriculture sector, especially in the recent year or more. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. I confess I'm always a little bit nervous when I start speaking for a crowd like this, because I'm reminded of something my mom once told me when I called her and I said, "Mom, I'm going to speak before this very sort of illustrious crowd. Any guidance for me?" And she thought for a moment and she said to me in her native Arabic, "Med zah il nas," which translates roughly into "don't be boring." So I will do my best out of deference to my mother, but if any of you know her, please don't let her know how I did. I want to start a little bit with CGAP. I think many of you are familiar with CGAP. We are a financial inclusion resource center housed at the World Bank. Our focus is financial inclusion, providing financial services to those who've been excluded traditionally through the formal financial system. And so we come at it from that angle, and we have been very involved in the use of mobile platforms for including financial services because of the potential we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years. That this is an incredibly positive way, an incredibly powerful way to get financial services into the hands of those who have been traditionally excluded. So we are now involved in how do we then take the traditional digital finance into the non-traditional areas of smallholder finance. How do we get those smallholders who are still excluded, that last mile, into the digital services? So I'm going to start with Don Rumsfeld. I just want to clarify I'm not Republican, but I actually find this guy to be very interesting. And in 2002, as he was trying to explain to the American people why we were entering into various wars that we don't seem to be able to win, he gave us this very profound comment: there are known knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. And this was somehow supposed to convince us that he knew what he was talking about. Now, he got a lot of flack for this, but it's perfectly logical. He's basically saying, look, there are some things that we know, things we don't know, and things that we don't know we don't know. And that was very much our guidance around exploring the smallholder space at CGAP. What did we know? The known, what has been done traditionally with terms of financial services for smallholders, was that smallholders need credit for inputs, seeds, high-quality seeds, fertilizer, so they can grow more product, so we can contribute to food security and increase their welfare. And that was the paradigm, I think, for decades around smallholder finance. And we talk about smallholders. What is it they need? They need credit so they can produce more and contribute to food security. That was the known, and there's been a lot of work on that, particularly around the value chain finance. Our estimates, though, is that of all the smallholders, the ones at the top that are tightly connected to these value chains are only about 7%. You have about 93% of smallholders who are not commercial at all or are only loosely connected to these value chains. And that's where we wanted to focus our efforts. So the known unknown, what we knew that we didn't know but we had to find out, was what is the wide array of financial services that smallholders need? Because as you go down the pyramid, the ones that are only focusing on agricultural production are actually relatively few. You find that they have a diverse array of incomes. Yes, I grow some crops, I sell some crops, but I also have a side business. I repair bicycles in my village. I also am a laborer at farmers nearby throughout the year. I get remittances from my kids who are in the city. And it's a matter of how do they juggle all those financial resources that we really wanted to get at. We wanted to understand holistically what are the financial lives of smallholders like? Because only when we understand that can we then tailor products that are going to meet those needs. But if we continue to see them only as agricultural producers, we're going to continue focusing on only one relatively small aspect of their lives. So what did we decide to do? At CGAP, we have done a diaries project. We have taken 90 families in 3 countries. That's Tanzania, Mozambique, and Pakistan. And we started these data collection last July. It's every 2 weeks we're visiting these families, asking them detailed questions about what they've done in terms of finances, what they've received, what they've spent. And we punctuate the year's collection with what we have trimestrally modules around certain aspects of their lives. How do you view mobile financial services? What are your aspirations? Do you even want to be a farmer? Do you want your kids to be farmers? Because we hear a lot about the best thing we can do for them is get them out of farming. And so to the extent that that's what they want to do, leave farming, we need to be aware of just how many of them there are. How do they go about planning their agricultural lives? So we want to get all of that information over the course of the year. And we think that will give us some very deep evidence, but that's qualitative evidence. That is about 90 families in these countries that are growing these particular crops under these particular irrigation systems. So people said, look, you really need to do something quantitative as well. And that's why we also have nationally representative surveys going on in a number of countries as well. Currently in Tanzania and Mozambique, but we certainly hope to get a number of other countries as well so that we can get a very solid, credible evidence base about how smallholders manage their financial lives so that we can better tailor products to them. On the other side, some initial insights from our diaries participants around mobile money. We asked them, have you ever heard of mobile money? And you'll see that with the exception of Mozambique, huge numbers have. In Tanzania, all of them had heard of it. In Pakistan, 97% had heard of it. So you would expect that the mobile take-up in Pakistan and Tanzania would actually be relatively high. In Pakistan, you see it's actually 0. They all have heard of it, none of them use it. And by the way, I have been reprimanded for how ugly this chart is, I'm sorry. I promise next year we will update it and make it very pretty. But the bottom line is that in Tanzania, even though 100% of the farmers had heard of mobile money, and Tanzania is a very well-developed mobile money market, only 18% use it. In Mozambique and Pakistan, 0. None of them actually use it, although in Pakistan they're very familiar with it. So there's some questions here about why that might be. And then when we asked them, if someone asked you, a family member or a business partner, a trader, to use it, would you? Are you open to it? There you see huge numbers in Pakistan. 93% said, yeah, we would. We're not opposed to it. We just haven't really had a need to use it yet. And that's, I think, very helpful for those who are trying to market mobile financial services to smallholders, that really what they're looking for is word of mouth and a direct application to their lives as opposed to signs that you see on the street or in the newspaper. We also did some research on the supply side last year. We looked into 3 different case studies. One was the GDP programs in Nigeria, in which they used digital to send basically vouchers for input subsidies. We also saw a case study in Tigo in Ghana, where there was sort of rice farmers in the value chain, buyers paying the farmers through digital money. And then we also looked at these ecosystems that Heiko had mentioned a little bit that are emerging in Zimbabwe, like EcoFarm or mFarm in Kenya. And we looked at these 3, and we came up with this publication. But our central conclusion was, although there's a lot of experimentation in this space, and there is, and it's very exciting, most of that experimentation is driven by the needs of other actors in the chain other than smallholders. So for example, in Nigeria, the government wanted to reduce leakage. They wanted to reduce the cost of sending out these vouchers. So that was in their interest. But nobody asked the Nigerian recipients, is this working for you, why or why not? Same with the contractors in Ghana with Tigo. It was the buyers who didn't want to take cash into the field and deal with that security risk who wanted to pay digitally. But nobody asked the farmers how they felt about that. We did, and some of the farmers were like, we don't even get reception out here. What do you mean you want to pay me, through a mobile wallet? This doesn't work for us. So that's why we said we really need to learn more about what the customer wants. And we have a number of human-centered design projects, and I know we're going to be talking about that with our guest from Frog, who's coming up right after me. But just so you're aware, we do have 4 projects going on right now. We've launched 2 with Eco Farmer in Zimbabwe and UOB Bank in Rwanda, and we will be working with mAgri in Mali and Amaranth Bank in Cambodia, all of whom have targeted smallholders as an important client segment for them. And so we're going to be working with them around digital finance and how we can reach these farmers. So that's it. We talked about the known known, the known unknown, and now we've got the unknown unknowns, and by definition, we don't know what those are. But we have discovered a few things since we've been working with this, and for me, the big question right now is the role between informational services and financial services through the mobile. As I said, we come at it from the financial services, so we want to know, how do we get there? And there are many people who will say, yes, you start with the payment services in the value chain. That's how you get farmers into the mobile ecosystem. And then there are others that say, no, you need to bring them in through informational services. You connect them to get them into the system through weather tips, planting tips, market prices. And then when you connect them to buyers through that ecosystem, suddenly you create a demand for the financial services, and so you build it up. And payments come last, not first. And that's the kind of question that I hope we're going to be exploring later on in the coming years as we see these systems develop. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michael. And yeah, fantastic background on CGAP's work, and look forward to discussing those during the panel discussion. So Brandon Edwards is the Executive Creative Director at Frog. We're working closely with Frog right now, actually, across 5 and hopefully 6 markets, where we're working with mobile operators and their agricultural partners to explore new opportunities for mobile agriculture services. And we've brought Frog on board to really dig deeper onto understanding those needs of those customers through the approach that Brandon will hopefully be sharing now. Thanks, Brandon.
Thank you very much, Victoria. So my name is Brandon Edwards. I'm a designer with Frog. We're a design firm, and I think I'm really humbled to be here. I know there's a lot of experts in the audience and as well on the panel. And as a background, my involvement has only been over the past 4 or 5 months, and over that time, just learned a tremendous amount. What we do as a design firm is really interesting in this sense because it's not too much different than what we do in any given project, whether it be related to farming or not. We're really looking at people, businesses, and behavior. So how can we affect the lives of people? How can we create meaningful products and services for them? But ultimately, really trying to figure out how to increase increase their engagement in society, increase their engagement with businesses, and increase something for businesses. So as Heiko said earlier, get to that 2 million additional customer base. The reason why that's important for us is we're essentially trying to create solutions that are going to be sustainable and not just one-off. So this mAgri initiative that we're working on with GSMA is across 5 different countries at the moment. So Myanmar, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, Malawi, and Ghana. And we're doing this over the course of 2 years. What we're trying to do is inject design, but also new types of product development and user experience thinking and human-centered design into mobile operators, as well as a consortium of partners in each of these countries. So it's not just go in and create a product and walk away, but figure out what are the processes and the methods that these organizations can take on to ensure that these services will be designed appropriately for their customers, but also so that they can scale over time. So as you can see, we've got 3 main phases here. The initial phase we've just kind of finished in all of the countries. We're working through designing those products and services right now, and then we'll test those with customers, scale them, figure out what doesn't work, and what does work, hopefully share some of those lessons learned across the world, and build them up from there. Now, one other thing I'll just mention here is GSMA was, I think, really prescient in setting up this program. So it wasn't just about bringing in Frog as an external company, but it was also about hiring local designers and teaming them up with us. So that's really fundamentally part of how we're working together, is having a local UX expert on the ground embedded with the product team, embedded with the marketing team, the sales and operation teams, to have that cycle of customer feedback and market acceptance so that that can scale up more sustainably. Now, as a designer, we have a lot of methods that we use to try to get at some of the, let's say, more nuanced ways of working. And so we're going to be publishing a toolkit later this year of the methods that we've used across these different programs. I think this is really interesting for anyone that's interested in coming up with new products and services and maybe using a few of these techniques to think of different ways to innovate. So we have everything from how you set up the project, who the team members are, what do you do to set your KPIs, how do you do market research, the entire ecosystem mapping that we'll do up front, and I'll get into that in just a second. We have the field research, obviously that Spencer spoke of. The field research is interesting because we go qualitative and we don't talk to a lot of people, but we speak really deeply with them to try to understand what it is that they're looking for, observe what works and what doesn't in their own lives. And then finally, we spend a lot of time coming up with ideas, refining those ideas, and iterating on them. And we do that with all of the local partners. So one example of that is setting your hypotheses. So we'll spend time mapping that entire ecosystem. I think this is important in farming because of the amount of partners and the complexities of the value chain. And so when we look at, for example, in Ghana, and we map that ecosystem in Ghana, one of the things that we learned was that there are these farming clubs and co-ops that already exist. But when we did the same thing in Sri Lanka, we had a question mark around that. And when we went into the field and tested that hypothesis, we realized that Sri Lanka has no formal farming co-ops. There are a lot of informal ones, but they're not that successful. So by doing something like this and mapping that out as a team, we help to understand what it is that we know, the known knowns, the unknown unknowns, and then go out into the field and test that. And then finally, I'll just highlight 3 of the key insights that we've seen amongst the many. And we're designing against several of these right now. So some of these insights are market specific, like what I talked about in Ghana and Sri Lanka, and other ones are cross-cutting. The first one is we made a major assumption that farmers didn't have access to market prices. And in some cases, actually what we found is that they do have access to market prices. And furthermore, if you say that they're going to have access to market prices and that's going to improve their ability to negotiate, they disagree with you. They say having the market price doesn't really help us in our negotiating power for a variety of reasons. So number one, we don't have proper storage techniques. Number 2, we don't have proper transportation techniques. And number 3, we don't have proper connections to other farmers to increase our selling ability. So these things are much more important than just having access to market prices. That tells us as designers and as people that are releasing products that we need to partner with other institutions that can help close the loop in this sense. The second one was around best practice in agriculture. So getting advice and tips, whether it be from chemicals and pesticides or how to manage yields. We assumed and we thought that people were misusing it because they didn't have access to this advice. What we found is that they don't trust this advice. So if some expert comes in or some service comes out and says, you need to do it this, that, and the other way, they say, well, no, that's not really going to help me. I don't know these people. If I try to follow that advice and it doesn't work, my entire crop is gone and I'm done. I'm toast. So really for them, seeing is believing. They have to see it work. And even seeing something from a neighbor and having that kind of proof of the pudding, as it were, is very, very important. So that actually tells us that instead of just pushing information, we also have to have local partnerships. We have to celebrate those farmers that are successful. And then we have to show in the content that we create how to do things and that it can actually help increase a yield, for example. And then the third one was the mobile device. So Heiko spoke of this. Mobile device being an unfamiliar channel for accessing information. This is fairly true. I mean, a lot of people look at the mobile and it's just not trusted. So what that tells us is not only depending on the type of content, but the type of channel that we use, we have to think about all of these and how they're intertwined. So we can't just create a service that is IVR only. We want to create an entire ecosystem of services. Think about the different touch points from SMS to IVR to face-to-face. And so that's what all of our teams are doing right now, is kind of figuring out in each market what those services look like. So for example, and also how they're connected together. I know in one case we're creating really simple things like a linkage between the SMS and the IVR system, so direct short codes that go straight into a specific menu tree. And then vice versa, that the content in the IVR is pushing SMS or pushing a physical object such as a crop calendar. So these are the kind of connections that we're trying to make right now in order to make sure that we're not just relying on mobile, but also thinking about the other touch points, the other channels that people find valuable. So those are three of many, and I'm looking forward to the discussion to see what else we can find. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brendan. Obviously, we'll touch on most of what you've talked about during the panel discussion, and especially the point around testing assumptions. I think we've learned the hard way in previous experience with working on mobile agriculture services around just going too quickly with certain assumptions. So I think Spencer also will touch on this point especially. So Spencer Morley is an implementation manager with FarmForce. It's fantastic to have you here today, Spencer. So thank you for providing a background on FarmForce.
Hi, my name is Spencer. I work with the FarmForce team. And I'm going to take you through a bit about what FarmForce is, how it works, and where we are as an organization. And so FarmForce is ultimately a web and mobile system for managing a smallholder contract farming scheme, generally in the developing world. And so maybe we talk for a second about kind of what that means. And so smallholder contract farming schemes that we see, they tend to have a very similar structure. So you have a formal business at the top, and then that formal business contracts smallholder farmers to grow crops for them, generally according to some kind of quality requirements. That business also employs a number of field officers who go out and work with the farmers and meet with them to make sure that they're kind of growing the crops according to the needs. And then that business processes the crops or exports them in some way. And so we build FarmForce to help manage this type of system. And we do that because we think that it's a good option for smallholder farmers. Being part of a scheme like this can link them to high-value markets in developed countries, a lot of times in situations where they would never be able to link to those markets without some type of contract farming scheme. You can also get some risk sharing between the business and the farmers, or between the farmers themselves. And there's a number of other kind of good kind of things that come along with having a long-term relationship and not simply growing commodity crops and selling to the middleman in the village and then kind of on to the local market. And so generally when we start working with these companies, they're using paper-based systems. I think paper's a good system if you're working with 100 farmers. Beyond that, it gets difficult and expensive just to manage all of the paper. A lot of times people tell us, the paper takes a week to come back from the field into the head office, and so it's virtually impossible to manage those field staff real time and be sure that they're actually doing everything that they need to do with the smallholder farmers. In a system that's totally paper-based, there's a higher propensity for fraud and theft because you can't automatically check different values in different parts of the system. And all of these things mean scaling and auditing are difficult. And the traceability and value chains that require it tends to be to a very large group of farmers, or maybe just to kind of the co-op level. And so, so when people say, what is FarmForce? It's a website and a mobile application that is used by a contract farming scheme to manage its operations. The website is used by the management in the office to do their job. The mobile application is used by the field staff when they go out and work with the farmers. The whole thing's cloud hosted. The mobile application runs on a low-end Android smartphone and works online and offline. And so how does that work in practice? So this is a field agent from a horticultural company in Kenya. That's a field of, I think, French beans in central Kenya. And so as a part of her job, she's out working with that farmer, entering pesticide spraying records, agronomic information like crop inspections, yield forecasts, things like that. When she synchronizes that mobile device, all that information goes up onto the server, and management in the office can see how the progress is going with that farmer. They can see what that field officer is doing, whether she's doing the job that she's supposed to be doing. And there's an internal control system for checking that everything is being done according to certain rules in the scheme. And so in this way, we kind of digitize the work that that field officer does. And so kind of what can we digitize? Well, almost everything that happens out at the field and at the farm during a season with a smallholder contract farming scheme. So everything about the kind of growing cycle, crop inspections, the yield forecasts. We can implement some good, very mobile, lightweight technology for harvest traceability. So you see there across the bottom, we can scan receipts for traceability. We have a Bluetooth scale that's integrated so the weight comes directly into the phone. And then we can print a receipt on the little mobile printer that connects to the phone over Bluetooth. And so in this way, kind of by the side of the road off the back of a truck, we can operate a pretty good digital collection point in the middle of nowhere. Yeah, and so that's kind of what FarmForce is and how it's used. Where we are as an organization. So we started a commercial rollout after piloting. That was about 2 years ago. We currently have 30 companies or so using the system in a very wide variety of countries across the developing world. I recently saw a report of all of the FarmForce databases, and the total number of farmers comes around 45,000 or so. And we now have client-facing offices in Southeast Asia, Africa, and Central America. We have some implementation level funding from USAID in Guatemala, and then COLACP is a part of the European Union. Primarily, they help us in Africa, and we greatly appreciate their support. And then a partnership with Global Gap, which is one of the major fresh fruit and veg standards. And so maybe just to wrap up, to talk a bit about the market, because some people ask me, do you think that this is a market that's kind of worth pursuing? And actually, yeah, we do. There's smallholder contract farming is used to produce a very wide variety of valuable crops, from kind of fresh fruit and veg that you buy in the supermarket here to kind of shrimp and fish, most, I think, of the coffee and cocoa. And then there's a movement now for kind of certified commodities that are certified sustainable. And we see some big public sustainability commitments by multinationals, and a really big push by the multinational retailers for more transparency and more traceability in value chains. And so in this situation, you can only have that in a contract farming scheme. If you have the kind of traditional thing where they just buy commodities on the open market that was bought from grain traders in the capital city of some country, you have no traceability and there's no way of knowing where it came from. And so you have to move towards contract farming schemes. And those very large multinational companies that really control a lot of these value chains, there is a very strong push in that direction. Also, we see the BRICS countries coming as consumers as well as producers. And people tell us that there is a fairly predictable pattern. As populations get more money, first people want more food, then they want better food, then they want safer food. And that's a trend that I think anybody who watches kind of the consumer market in China can see that very much, and I think that will definitely continue. And also kind of the efficiency and yield. If you want to double the yield of a farm in Germany, that's probably going to be very difficult. Whereas a number of the schemes that we work with, the farmers that they start working with, they can kind of double or triple yields because it starts from a low base. And so I think that there's kind of efficiency to be gained and money to be made there. And also just kind of land use in a crowded world. In a lot of countries, if you wanted to buy 1,000 hectares of land for a commercial farm, this is going to be extremely difficult. Whereas contracting 1,000 farmers maybe not be easy, but it's possible. And so we think that there's a lot of kind of convincing elements to the kind of market opportunity for expanding smallholder contract farming. Yeah, and we're quite excited about the next 5 years. And so I think I'll probably end it there and hand back over to Victoria. Yeah, thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much to all our panelists, and yeah, some great background to set the context for the discussion now. So the first area that we'd like to tackle in the discussion today is really around that question of understanding the rural customer. So we've heard a lot from Natalia this morning about different opportunities that exist within the agriculture sector as a whole for mobile operators and other service providers in the space. In our experience at GSMA, we have seen a handful of services that have had some success. But really, when you think about it, and if you look at our deployment tracker, there is a lot of services out there that haven't really taken off yet. So we ask ourselves, why is that? One of the areas that we've invested in is to try to understand whether it's a problem around understanding the rural customer properly, designing relevant and localized, customized solutions. So we also know that the rural customer is incredibly difficult to reach. I think seasonal income, low income, generally higher literacy, all the usual challenges with that underserved market. So I guess the question today for the panelists is really, we've heard about the opportunity and we've heard about the need to understand the customers. And now it comes to the investment required in order to do that. So do mobile operators, do third-party providers, do other service providers do they have a big enough appetite to make these kind of investments to create the solutions and change the status quo in terms of design? So I'll ask Heiko to open up as a mobile operator representative.
Well, obviously we are interested, and we have to grow our business. We heard, to grow business as an operator in Europe and the US is almost impossible. So you grow laterally. But in our case, we need to explore these rural areas. We need to invest in rural areas. In some places, it is mandatory even by regulatory requirements. So we have to go into rural areas, even though we initially perceive there is no business. So once we're there, we of course are interested to make as much out of it as we can, and every little bit that helps us understand better what our customers want, who they actually are. Again, as opposed to the developed world where you have like any kind of customer insight that you want at a push of a button, you don't have that in Africa. You virtually have no idea who that person is that is using your phone. You have virtually no idea about his family situation, about his economic situation. You know all of this by and large about everything in Europe or in the United States, but you have literally not a faintest clue what's happening in the rural areas in Africa. Partially this is because there's no national. There's no national ID card. I don't even know who that person is. Literally, what's his name or her name? So every input that comes from partners is more than welcome. We cannot do it alone as mobile operators. Our investments are already quite extensive on the technical side. We need to focus on our core business as much as we need to focus on the technical investment. So the inputs that come from Frog, that come from people like Michael and Spencer, which give us an idea of, if we don't know in terms of their name and this, but at least we know what they do. We have already made a first step into some sort of knowledge and how would we address our customers. So yes, we will invest, and yes, we will have to continue to invest, but we also need the input with partner. We need the partners to come to us and provide us the information, and these kind of synergies will then help to develop more business in the rural areas.
Great, thank you. And Spencer, from your perspective and your position in the mAgri industry as a platform provider, what's your appetite or amongst your peers for investing in, say, a human-centered design approach to tailoring your solution?
Yeah, so I think, so I'll very much look forward to what you guys are going to publish about how you do that. I think that looks like a fascinating approach. And this is, and would be very welcome. I think with us, what we have tended to focus on is really deploying things on the ground, seeing what works, refining it, deploying it again. Because some of the things that people touched on, I don't normally associate Donald Rumsfeld with smallholder farming in Africa, but I think that is really a fantastic quote, and I think it really does describe that situation, And exactly, some of the conclusions people were talking about, there's kind of an idea that, okay, if you just give farmers pricing information, then, okay, their problem will be solved, But actually, you kind of, the unknown is, okay, you do that, and then, okay, then there's a host of other problems that kind of come up that means that it's not, quite as simple. So one thing I would say kind of on the more general point is that the more successful projects that we've seen tend to focus on some type of multiplier and working with existing systems or partners. And so for us, there is no way that we could directly engage with 45,000 smallholder farmers in, I don't know, like 15 countries or something. Just logistically, this would be impossible. And so this is part of why we work with the contract farming schemes, because with a certain amount of time, money, and effort, we can go much farther focusing on that kind of multiplier organization as opposed to going out and really directly trying to reach those farmers. And so I think that's kind of an important component of a project design. Yeah, and important when working with these structures and kind of populations which are largely informal and spread out over a very large area.
Okay. So on your point of launching something, building something, launching it, seeing if it works, and then adapting it, Brandon, I think you've been on the front line in the last few months in terms of that approach within an operator environment. So typically what we've seen with value-added service providers is it's that approach. We need to launch ahead of our competitor. We'll launch something quickly, push it out. If it works, great. If it doesn't, we drop it and move on to the next thing. So Brandon, what have you seen in terms of an appetite or opening up to this very different style of developing services, much potentially more expensive and potentially longer? What's been the reaction?
Well, I think there's obviously a real hesitation to take a little bit more time, but it's so much more valuable to know who you're launching for and why, and then what to launch in the first place. I think to your point of deploying and then seeing what works and then deploying again and seeing what works, the thing that we typically see is deploy, 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 deploy. And by the time they see what works or what doesn't, it's already 3 or 4 versions down the road, and they have invested too much to then change things, right? So I think one of the things that we see in the successful cases across any sector is what FarmForce does, which is deploy and test and iterate. And then I guess that though the appetite is changing, and in space like farming where it's a little bit of an unknown for operators, I mean, I think the ones we're working with are a little bit ahead of the curve, but in this space where it's an entirely new sector, or entirely new customer base, or entirely new geographies that they don't have a lot of knowledge in, they are willing to kind of step back and say, wait a second, we don't really know much about this. Let's do a little bit of digging to understand it better.
And so then that brings the question of, in CGAP's case, obviously, we're in the same kind of position here. We're working closely with service providers, in your case, financial institutions and operators, to do a lot of this work with them. What's been your feeling from the financial institutions around this different approach to understanding that target customer in a holistic way?
Two things. One is that for all the talk that we have about we need to understand the customer and get out in the field and monitor them, and obviously I believe in that because we spend a lot of money on some of these research projects, but at the end of the day, the single largest obstacle is going to be overcoming the traditional hurdles in any sort of mobile money scheme. And it just gets magnified when you're talking about the rural agricultural segment. For example, if you don't have network coverage, you're wasting your time. If you don't have agents in the village that can do the cash in, cash out function, you're wasting your time. And those kinds of investments in that basic infrastructure of these models is the first thing you need to have out there. And then, of course, the question of customer literacy is even, again, enhanced when you're talking about these populations. So those you have to get done and out of the way. It's only when you have those that you can start talking about, okay, now how do we build on that leverage in a different way? And in some cases, we don't even have that. And then the other point I wanted to make about sort of, well, what do we do with all this information? You know, I was recently working with a financial service provider and a human-centered design firm. And I think what the human-centered design firms do is great, and it's a welcome addition to the space. But the frustration from this financial service provider was, these people come here with their artsy-fartsy Post-its up on a wall and all these things, and I need something that works. Just give me something that works. Let's scale it down a notch, and rather than come up with, here's the new platform and here's the new interface, just tell me something simple, easy, and actionable, because otherwise it's not going to go anywhere. And that was, you know, I thought a very helpful comment, because at the end we want something that providers can actually use. Yeah.
Great observation, definitely. I think it's finding that correct balance, isn't it? So that brings me actually onto the theme of financial services in mobile financial services within this agriculture sector. So we understand that there's farmers are demanding information, relevant, timely, and actionable information. But I think Natalia touched on it earlier. There's a huge opportunity still in terms of financial inclusion and getting to that difficult and underserved rural market and offering the use case for a farmer to actually want to use mobile money to create the relevance that they actually will see in day-to-day life. So in our experience, we see a lot of information services, a lot of agricultural value-added services, and some operators are starting to look at bundle services, such as yourselves in Malawi. Another example is Vodafone's Connected Farmer Initiative, which is seeing some success early on in East Africa. So the question is, in terms of future scale, we heard on Tuesday at the Mobile Money State of the Industry session that really there's a couple of areas that will really bring scale to the mobile money industry, and one of those is around the ecosystem, and the other is around these other products that you can layer onto your existing product or your platform, insurance, credit, and savings. So the question really is, who's going to be driving this innovation in terms of the growth for mobile money in the rural sector? We're seeing some operators starting to offer bundled services, or even to capture those existing payments that take place throughout the agricultural value chain. Some are exploring early mobile agriculture insurance products, but we see a lot more really still in the third-party area, the innovation. So Heiko, maybe you can just comment on that. Where do you see, or what do you see the role of the operator in specifically driving this space?
Well, from an operator perspective, despite the fact that it will always, as I said earlier, there needs to be partners. Then we need to have the input, because we cannot create all that input ourselves. It's too expensive. It's not sustainable. But on the other hand, we also need, very selfishly, to remain in the driver's seat to a certain extent, because at the end of the day, it's our platforms, it's our investment and the massive investment that goes into it. And as Michael touched on it, when there's no coverage, mobile money doesn't make any sense. So, we need to be there first, and therefore this becomes part of our business model going out. And when it becomes part of your business model, it becomes part of your marketing planning. It becomes part of how this development integrates in your whole business operation. The development of the ecosystem becomes therefore also part of our core focus in terms of how we're driving our business forward. Michael touched on not only on the coverage, but also on the agent network that needs to be about it. So the question is, shall we invest ourselves into this agent network? So shall we basically put it up front and therefore stimulate, supply and then create demand by having these people sitting there? Or should we more invest in a more holistic infrastructure and in ecosystem, so to avoid the necessity of an agent? I mean, the best of all worlds for us is that it all stays on the platform, that there is no cash at all, that he gets his money on the mobile platform, that he pays his services on the mobile platform, and that the grocer where he goes to in the village accepts mobile payment, where in this grocer in turn buys its own goods again on the mobile platform. So there is not only one way, and there's probably in different places different solutions necessary, but in essence we need to, as mobile operators, these become fundamental pillars of our services. Voice is there, and that's our core traditional business, and we've seen it. It will remain a dominant part, but as much as data is a pillar of growth for mobile operators, the mobile money field is a third essential growth field for us operators, which we will continue to work on and certainly invest.
Mm-hmm. And Michael, from your experience, both working with operators and financial institutions, do you see any particular trend in terms of innovation in mobile financial services? Who's driving this, or is there a mix?
I don't, to be honest with you, but the one story I kind of want to leave people with was sort of the unpredictability of everything that we're doing. I remember being in rural Kenya, working with a 1 acre farmer. Some of you may be familiar with 1 acre, and they were testing a repayment through mobile channel of their input loans. So they're given inputs and they have to pay it back, and so they've been told, okay, here's a control group, we want you to use M-Pesa to pay it back. And one farmer who was in the study was very proud. He showed me his little receipt and he said, look, I made my payment through M-Pesa, and I looked and it said balance 0. And I said, well, if you have an M-Pesa account, why don't you have a balance? And he's like, oh, no, 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 we don't want to keep our money in digital value out here because in the rural areas, there's nothing to spend cash on. So if I want to save money, I save in cash. If I want to have, if people know I have it digitally, then suddenly I have to send it to my relatives everywhere and that kind of thing. So it was entirely counterintuitive to everything we've been told or we've been telling them about how they should be doing it. And it's exactly the unknown unknowns that I never know how to predict for.
Yeah, so you can't really, yeah.
Yes.
And Brandon, from your angle of working with operators, both in this partnership with GSMA on the Agri side, and previously with other operators, do you have a view on where the mobile financial services industry is going in terms of the operator's role versus, the ecosystem players or the third parties?
Well, I think the two gentlemen are right. If you don't have that closed loop, like it's not really going to work. I think there isn't really a silver bullet to this. And that's what you see looking backwards at the data, right? And there are the things that you know foundationally that you need, like the agent ecosystems, no matter who's involved in that from an ecosystem perspective. But you really need to not try to solve it all at once and take small, simple steps to get there. And so that might be 1 or 2 partnerships at a time. And over time, that ecosystem would build out.
And Spencer, in your case, FarmForce does offer the ability to use mobile payments. You don't have a strategic partnership with any of the operators in your markets. Have you considered that, or was that not really of interest to FarmForce?
So, so we offer the ability to do mobile payments with FarmForce, not in a fully automated way at the server side, but a few other kind of good mechanisms. And people ask us about mobile payments frequently. But again, and we always say, hey, look, we'll support you to do it. But frequently, the problems kind of are either non-technical or not on our end. And just run through a couple of those quickly. Farmers always prefer cash. If you give the farmer an option, do you want to get paid in cash or mobile payment? He takes cash every time, right? We see that almost universally. Another one is just like, take an example. We've looked into kind of a few projects that had this. And so, okay, so say you have a very small scheme, 100 farmers, very small harvests. They bring their crops, they get paid $100. Frequently, they're all going to do that at the same time. So that's $10,000 that has to be cashed out. Let's say there's 2 mobile money agents in a village in rural Ghana. It's not going to be possible, right? And so typically, also mobile network coverage. Farmers a lot of times will say, if they bring crops to a collection point, you either need to hand them cash or they need to see that payment arrive on their phone before they'll let you drive away with those crops, right? Because they've been swindled plenty of times, And so, so if it's not in near real time, then that's a problem. And you get into a lot of this stuff that's kind of the practicalities of doing business much more than the kind of technical side of it. And I think anybody who's really interested in this stuff, I'd highly encourage them to read a book or 2 about the financial lives of smallholder farmers, because there's all kinds of fascinating stuff like gentleman on my left was talking about that. So for instance, people try to keep their financial resources as liquid and mobile in a physical sense as possible. In Nairobi, people drive around with $2 worth of petrol in their car because they don't want to put those resources into the gas tank where they can't be moved out to do something else, right? If somebody comes and wants to borrow money, they want to be able to do that, And so, there's some elements there that the way money works and the economic decision making is very, very different from, I would hazard a guess, everyone in this room, right, who has credit cards and travels internationally and stuff. I think that's an important component. From our side, from a partnership, so we offer FarmForce as a product. It's the same worldwide. We haven't, and so as a consequence, for instance, we can't integrate in one country because then that makes the platform very specific for that country. If anyone came to us and there was a mobile network that had a mobile money scheme in all of the countries we operate in, I think we'd be happy to discuss with them if we could agree one deal and be done with it.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we'll pause here in the discussion and see if there's any questions from the audience. I'm just conscious of the time, so we just want to see any questions for our panelists. Thanks, Fraser.
Hi there, I'm Fraser Norton from Cabby. We're an agricultural content provider. Heiko, I'm quite interested in, you obviously value the service because you've taken it from Madagascar into Malawi, and you've seen it have an effect on ARPU, on customer acquisition, customer retention. Do you actually run a full profit and loss on it as a commercial product in your organization?
Yes, as much as we can. It's a bit tricky because obviously there's intertwining. That particular customer is not necessarily only a customer that comes or has used only this service. So to run an explicit P&L for it is difficult, like it would be for any service. I mean, how do you separate? Somebody picks up a bundle, a specific bundle that is supposedly designed for their target group. I cannot differentiate whether he uses headline rates at one point in time, and you see what I mean. So as much as we can, we try to be as scientific as we can in terms of running control groups and looking at behavior before and look at cohort analysis before and after, and then try to extrapolate that obviously into the profitability. And in this case, the cohort analysis have shown that the uptake, be it in more calls received, more calls made, SMS sent, all things that increase ARPU, and then obviously retention in other control groups, that they show it is profitable. And that is, for me, the most important thing. Now, how profitable, that debate can always be out there. Where's the other money come from? But that the data that we have shows that it is a profitable undertaking.
Any other questions from the audience? It's the lady at the front, thank you.
Hi, my name's Amanda Noonan. I work for Internews. I just wondered, a number of you talked about mapping ecosystems, and I wondered how much you considered mapping the information ecosystems of the communities you're seeking to support. It seems we've talked a lot about technology and regulatory things, but actually what we're talking about is getting the right information to the right people at the right time. And in a lot of these communities, often the way people receive information is through trusted and influential others in that community who they go to for that information. So by understanding how those dynamics work and also how people use technology within those systems is a very powerful way of mapping and understanding how to deliver the right information to people. It's also very good for operators because they can then create that demand by showing and telling that actually information, maybe through a third party who's influential on an individual, is actually a very good place to go for information, and then they themselves may want to take that information directly via mobile. So I just wondered to what extent you've used those kinds of techniques to understand and surface those dynamics.
May I? Yes. So actually, this is quite fascinating because this was one of the methodologies that we used across all of the countries. So mapping both the information at a hypothesis level across the ecosystems, but then in talking to all of the different individuals and groups, whether it be farmers or other actors in the system, where they get their information from, but where they trust certain types of information from, and so mapping out those layers of trust. And so, for example, that's influenced a few of the ways in which the products are positioned and bundled and packaged, in the case of having things like an ambassador who has a certain amount of calls and SMSs that are completely free within a certain circle of friends. So that can work either for someone that's more formal, like an authority figure in a village, or it can work for your friends and family that you trust with that kind of information. So that kind of stuff has very much influenced the service that we've created.
If I could just add on to that, though, it's interesting because we had the same experience, certainly in Zimbabwe, but the product itself can undo the trust in the end. And the one I'm talking about is the weather insurance. And there was an ambassador that sort of pushed this other insurance. They all thought it sounded great. They signed up for it. And then they would get these little notices that said, you had X amount of rainfall this week, and it was totally dry that week. And they thought, well, the weather information's wrong, so we no longer trust this service. They're paying us out for overflow of rain, but we didn't have any rain, so we'll take the money, but we're not so sure we like this. So we can actually undo, it's not enough just to have that kind of ambassador and that trust network. You also have to have a product that inspires trust as well. I guess you probably knew that, right?
Thank you. I think we have time for a couple more questions.
Where do you see Bitcoin and blockchain fitting into this at all?
Sorry?
Bitcoin and blockchain technology?
Bitcoin?
So international remittances. Yeah, I think that's from the people I know and the work that we've done and what we've seen, using Bitcoin as a transfer mechanism to avoid the 11 or 12% that a lot of people are paying when they try to transfer, when diaspora folks try to transfer money back. That's the best example I've seen. But I'm not sure if anybody else has other ones. That's,
I have a question building on Cabby's question. Great to see that there is a P&L assigned to these kind of services. In the future, will we see that this is providing a commercial value enough that it can be commercially independent? Because so far we've seen that there's a lot of donor-driven things. Will the future hold more commercial-driven things? And second very quick question is, if we look at the future, when will we see more apps? You talk about 2G kind of services in your research, Brandon. Are we going to see apps pick up more and more in this area?
I go first from then on the apps, but I believe that it will be profitable enough that in the future it will be self-sustaining. That the creative departments in network operators in those areas, in those parts of the world, that with the development of these segments becoming larger and becoming more, adopting telecommunication, and therefore usage gets higher, that the marketing departments will provide, together with the partners from the outside, will do this on their own. I do not think that this is that we see the same kind of outside funding in 3 years' time that we currently have. It's a kickoff funding, and it's necessary in that respect because our budgets are obviously limited, and by the sheer nature of the beast, we are focusing obviously on our core business, and then these developments would not really take place in the same level as they can now when there is seed funding, if you will, but it will eventually lead into self-sustainability, and fun. But the outside input, and that is when your up question, still needs to come, like we do it from the VAS service as well. I mean, we are not developing VAS our own. We have VAS partners that come to us and want to use our platform, and we partner up with them, and that's the kind of similar development that I see in the future.
In Myanmar, we'll see apps. We'll see apps right away because everyone's jumping straight to smartphones. But I guess I'm less concerned about whether it's apps or not, and more concerned about the right content or the right services delivered in the context of over the right channel in order to build trust, in order to generate some kind of meaningful outcome to that. And so, yeah, there will be apps, and I think that will be a part of it, but only one part of that system.
I'm afraid I think we are actually out of time. Apologies for the audience. If you'd like to try and catch the panelists on their way out, ask your question, that might be the only way. Thank you, everybody, for your attendance today and your participation, and especially to our panelists who've provided some fantastic background and also discussion on the theme of sustainability in the future in mobile agriculture. Thank you very much, everyone.